This is the iPad Air 4th generation, one of the best value iPads that you could buy in recent years. However, this iPad was released in 2020. So the big question is, should you be considering it in 2024 or rather buy a newer iPad Air 5th generation or an iPad Pro? In this video, I am going to answer all of those questions by taking you through my experiences of using the iPad Air 4th generation, as well as the specs and the features of this iPad. So let's get to it. How's it going, everyone? My name is Musanziane. So I've been using the iPad Air 4th generation for more than a year now. So in this video, I'm going to tell you what I think of this iPad overall. So let us start with the design and the build of this iPad. So the iPad Air 4th generation design looks modern. It looks more like that of the iPad Pro. This design was first introduced on the iPad Pro in 2018, and I can say that in 2024, it is still holding up very well. However, there's a rumor that we'll be getting a refresh of the iPad design this March in 2024, and obviously that design is likely to start with the iPad Pro, and the iPad Air might get that design later on. The iPad Air 4th generation not only looks like the iPad Pro, but it also looks exactly like the newer iPad Air 5th generation, which was released in 2022, which was 2 years later after the release of the iPad Air 4th generation. So they did not even change that design. That just shows how good the design was. So all they did was just to change the internals and some of the specs of the iPad Air. So if you're using an iPad 4th generation and someone using an iPad 5th generation, in terms of looks, there is no difference. The iPad Air 5th generation has 5 colors to choose from, including rose gold and grey. So obviously, as you have seen already in the video, the iPad Air that I use is a sky blue iPad Air, which I think the color still looks good, pretty much like the Sierra blue that you find on the iPhone 13 Pro Max. The iPad Air 4th generation also uses some stereo speakers, which are very good, but for me, 90% of the time, I'm likely to use my iPad with AirPods on. So those speakers don't really matter that much, but I think it's good to know that you can always pick up your iPad and then watch something, and the stereo speakers will just do a good job. One other thing to note about the iPad Air 4th generation is that although it looks like the iPad Pro, it uses Touch ID, unlike the iPad Pro, which uses Face ID. For some who prefer Face ID, this is a downside, but for people who prefer Touch ID, this is a good option for you. So you're getting a modern looking iPad that still uses a Touch ID, unlike the iPad 9th generation, which uses an older body but still retains that Touch ID. Another good thing to take note of is that the iPad Air 4th generation uses USB-C, so that is a good thing. So for me, I use the same charger to charge my iPhone 15 as well as this iPad here, and I also use that USB-C port to plug in my external SSD, which I also use on my iPhone as well as my Mac. So that is a good port that allows me to use some of my accessories across all of my devices, as well as share my iPhone and my iPad charger. And now let's talk about the display of the iPad Air 4th generation. So the iPad Air 4th generation uses a 10.9-inch liquid retina display that has true tone colors. However, it only comes with 500 nits of brightness, which for me, I think it only works when you are indoors or when you are in low light spaces. So if you are to go outside and try to use the iPad, you probably won't enjoy it as much as you would when you are indoors, because that is not the brightest screen out there. However, the screen is still good for watching movies as well as watching YouTube. I also use my iPad sometimes as a second screen on my Mac. The display is also fully laminated, meaning that there is no air gap in between the screen and the pixels. So it feels like you are actually touching the actual pixels that you see on the screen. Unlike the iPad 9th generation, which does not have a fully laminated screen, you can actually see a bit of an air gap in between the pixels and the actual screen. So the experience on the iPad Air is better than that of the iPad 9th generation, especially when you are writing and taking notes, which is something that I do a lot on my iPad. And speaking of taking notes, the iPad Air 4th generation supports Apple Pencil 2, which is a much better pencil in terms of design compared to the first generation Apple Pencil. So the grip is way much better, and you also get the double tap gesture that you can use to switch in between an eraser and a brush. And by the way, if you're enjoying this video, please hit the like button. That helps the video reach out to more people, and also consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. Let's continue. And now let us talk about the cameras on the iPad Air 4th generation. The iPad Air 4th generation has one rear 7 megapixel camera that can take 1080p videos. I hardly use this camera for taking pictures. I only use it to scan documents. So for me, it doesn't really matter that much. This iPad also has a front-facing camera for FaceTime, Zoom, and Teams meetings. The front camera, I can say it is just okay. So overall, all of the cameras, the front and rear, I'd say they are just okay. They get the job done. And now let us talk about the storage options of this iPad. So there are two storage options. The first one is a 64 gig, which is the base and the entry storage. And then the second one is a 256 storage, which is the other and bigger storage that you can get. I opted for the base 64 gig storage, obviously because of price, because one of the best thing about the iPad Air 4th generation is the pricing. And the minute you want to opt for a 256 gig, so that kind of puts you in an iPad Pro or an iPad 5th generation territory, and that kind of defeats the whole purpose of buying an iPad Air 4th generation. So I bought the 64 gig storage, which is not enough. However, I use my external SSD to store files and to move stuff around. So I don't necessarily need to store a lot of things directly on the iPad. And now let us talk about the battery life of the iPad Air 4th generation. So I get somewhere between 4 hours to 10 hours of battery life, which is almost like half day. And obviously that depends on what kind of work are you doing on the iPad. But for me, if I'm to do like intense and long hours, I'm likely to plug in my iPad and then work with it while it is plugged. But other than that, I think for all of the other stuff that I do, I find that the iPad always has enough battery for me to do whatever it is, maybe for like 2 hours or 4 hours, whether I'm editing a video or anything like that. I think the battery is just okay. So charging it all the time, if you know that you use it a lot, I think that's something that can help. And speaking of battery life and tasks that you can do on your iPad, some of the things that I do on my iPad include writing, whether it is ideas or video scripts or just taking notes in general. I also do a lot of email and also web browsing on the iPad, and I also watch a lot of YouTube as well as movies and content from different streaming apps such as Apple TV Plus or Netflix or Prime, whichever one that I'm using the subscription for that specific month, because I like to switch in between my subscriptions. I also do some light video editing using mobile apps such as Vlo and also Adobe Premiere Rush. So this is where I sometimes finish editing my videos, especially when there is load shedding where I cannot use my Mac. I'm likely to just copy my stuff across and then I will use my iPad to kind of push the editing or some of my videos. Sometimes I would start there. It depends basically where I have my video stored at that time. And also sometimes when I go to work at the coffee shop, I'll use my iPad as my main computer. I'll obviously plug in my keyboard and also my mouse, and I'll just do all of my work from the iPad. I also have Office 365 installed, so I have Excel, I have Word, so I'm also able to work through some of my documents as well. And in terms of performance, the iPad Air 4th generation uses an A14 Bionic chip, which is actually good. It is not the fastest out there, but I think it is good enough, especially for most of the tasks that I do, as I've mentioned earlier. And I think it will also support iPad OS 18 and most likely iPad OS 19. So I'd say it is good enough. You can still get about 2 or 3 years from the iPad Air 4th generation. And then now on to the big question. Should you be buying the iPad Air 4th generation in 2024, or who should be buying this iPad? Well, I'd say that if you want to do the kind of tasks that I do, as I've mentioned, tasks such as browsing your emails, working on a few documents there and there, and light video editing, I'd say this is a decent iPad that you can pick up out there, save yourself a bit of cash, pick up the iPad Air 4th generation. It looks modern and it has an okay battery life. So I think for those kind of tasks, it can still work in 2024 as well as 2025. However, if you want a bit more power and you say you want to do some mobile gaming and you want to do some professional video editing, I'd suggest that you get an iPad Air 5th generation, which has an M1 chip. and because it has an M1 chip, it falls under the list of iPads that can support apps such as DaVinci Resolve, which is one of the professional video editing softwares that was available on the Mac, and right now it is also available on the iPad. So I think the iPad Air 5th generation with an M1 chip, or getting a newer iPad Pro, I think that will be your option if you want to do a bit more heavy tasks. And also, like I mentioned earlier in the video, there is rumors that there is a newer iPad Air and also iPad Pro coming in March, so you might also want to consider picking one of those. But for basic stuff, like I've mentioned, the iPad Air 4th generation is still good enough. And we've come to the end of this video. Thank you for watching. Please remember to hit the like button. Also remember to consider subscribing to this channel for more content like this. If you want to see my other review videos, I'm going to include them on the description below. Also, if you want to see my video on iPad bias guide, if you are not sure which iPad is best for you, look on the description. I'll include a link to that video. I'll catch you guys on the next video.